And as you brought out, the reason why we celebrate the 4th of December as Navy Day is because on the night of the 3rd and 4th December, the Indian Navy launched a spectacular attack on Karachi Harbour in a manner which nobody was expecting. It is considered one of the most audacious naval attacks in the annals of naval warfare. 4 missile boats. We had got these small missile boats from the Soviet Union in 1969. They could carry 4 missiles each, but they had a very limited range. They couldn't sail beyond a certain distance because they were so small. But 4 of them were taken from Mumbai, 2 were based at Okha, two sailed from Mumbai. They were taken under tow. They were towed by larger ships. They were brought near Karachi and let loose to carry out a missile attack on Karachi Harbour and the ships around. So 4 missiles were launched totally. The first missile hit PNS Shah Jahan, which was a Pakistani naval destroyer and one of the biggest ships in the Pakistani naval fleet. Another missile hit PNS Muhafiz, which was a minesweeper, also patrolling over there. The third missile hit a merchant ship, which was actually carrying arms and ammunition for Pakistan from North Korea. And the fourth missile hit the oil tanks of Karachi Harbour and lit Karachi ablaze. The reports indicate that, I wasn't there, of course, but what we've heard is that the flames could be seen, or Karachi could be seen brightly lit for many hours, even into the next day, by the sheer magnitude of the attack on the oil tanks. So this was and immediately after carrying out the attack, the ships turned around and rushed back. So the Pakistan Navy could not even imagine that such an attack could ever have been attempted or have been successful. They kept thinking those missiles that were coming in were actually aircraft that were approaching them to attack them. And so they were, even after the missiles were launched, they continued firing anti-aircraft guns, thinking they were aircraft because they couldn't believe that a missile from those small missile boats could have reached all the way to Karachi. So that is why this attack is considered so audacious and very, very unparalleled. To give you a little background, why was this attack planned so audaciously? You know, in 1965, also we fought a war with Pakistan. We won that war, but the Navy was not really used in that war. When the naval chief of the time, Admiral Soman, went to the Prime Minister and said, the Navy's got to make major contribution to make at sea. The message that was given was, look, we don't want to escalate this war beyond a certain point. If we bring in the Navy, the war could escalate further. So you please remain in a defensive role and don't carry out any offensive operations. Possibly this was also partly because it was the first time the Navy, there was a maritime involvement or maritime dimension included in the war. In the 62 war with China, there was no maritime dimension. So maybe there was a hesitation on the part of the Indian government or the Indian political leadership. They didn't understand how a Navy operates, how successful will the Navy be. And this emboldened Pakistan enough in 1965 to come all the way into near Gujarat and carry out attacks on Dwarka, naval attacks on Dwarka. We did not even retaliate to those. So the Navy was really smarting from this sort of not having been allowed to participate and contribute to the 65 war. And so Admiral Nanda, who was the chief of the naval staff, had decided and told the Navy that when we in the 71 war, we will make a mark. We will prove that we are a significant player in the game, and we will contribute significantly with our bold actions to India's ultimate victory. And that, I think, is what was achieved, because navies, by the very nature of their sort of force structuring, ships moving at high speeds with very offensive weapons, are meant to be offensive weapons. They're meant to go into war. They're meant to go into harm's way. You can't keep them in a defensive role and say, if somebody attacks us, you please retaliate. No, you're supposed to go there and attack the enemy. That's why you have speed and that's why you have agility in your ships to be able to do that. So I think 71 proved decisively that India can do that. And that is why this was, of course, one operation only, Operation Trident, on the night of 3rd, 4th December, which became Navy Day. And this was on the west coast of India, in the North Arabian Sea. But even in the east, in the Bay of Bengal, INS Vikrant, India's only aircraft carrier at the time, carried out very, very dominating attacks, debilitating attacks on the East Pakistani naval presence in Chittagong and Cox's Bazar. Bangladesh hadn't been created till then. And totally cut off the supply lines to the Pakistan Army in the east. So effectively, within a week or 7 or 8 days of the war starting, India had established total maritime dominance on the west coast and on its east coast. And thereafter, the Pakistan Navy did not venture out even to sea to take on the Indian Navy. They were so demoralized by this. So that, in a nutshell, is what the Navy did in the 71 war, and why 4th of December is called Navy Day today. That is the significance of Navy Day. So that I just thought as an introduction. But now your question, can you just repeat that, please? You asked me a question about this, about Navy Day.
Sir, this was all the answer, I guess.
Okay, fine.
What is the significance? Thank you
Okay.
so much, sir. That was very enlightening. So, carrying out the webinar further, I would invite Ms. Anamrita Banerjee and discuss a very contemporary issues into the armed forces. Anamrita ma'am, my question to you is like, how do you reflect upon the kind of inclusion of women into the Indian Navy? And as a policy analyst, how do you reflect on this issue? Hello.
Nandini, hello.
Uh,
She's having some issues with her network. Okay, she has asked for 2 minutes time. Okay, so
sure.
we can continue with Anil sir.
Sure, sir.
Okay.
So, since one of our overarching theme was the naval warfare, so to all us the youngsters, what generally comes to our mind is the submarine and the destroyers. So, as a veteran, how do you really make us understand as a layman that what does the naval warfare looks like in from your lens as a submariner?
So, the impression we all have of naval warfare is of, we see those pictures of old days where two ships were sort of attacking each other, facing each other, guns booming, etc., at each other. Those days are long gone. Now we have weapons which can fire hundreds of kilometers away with pinpoint accuracy. And so what this is what we call standoff targeting. That means you can't actually see the enemy, but because you've detected on your radar, you can track its position and you can launch a weapon, which can carry out an attack many hundreds of miles away if required. So the whole sort of concept of naval warfare has changed over the years. Now with technology having developed so much, we it's not only about one ship versus another ship or one ship versus a fleet. It's about whole fleets working together because of what we call a concept called network centric warfare. That means all the ships operating. For example, let us take an aircraft carrier. I'm just giving an example. An aircraft carrier operates with a group of ships along with it. That's why it's called an aircraft carrier battle group, CBG. These ships are the formation is so formed that the aircraft carrier does not face any threat either from the air. That means there are enough ships with anti-aircraft capability. From a submarine, that means there are ships protecting it with anti-submarine warfare capability, or even from surface weapons, because there are ships which have better surface weapons than what the enemy can launch at you. So effectively, network-centric warfare means that all these ships, which are covering a very wide area, let's say a carrier battle group would cover a frontage of almost 200 kilometers, let's say. All these ships are networked with each other. So if, let's say, the ship on the extreme left detects a submarine which is 10 miles away from it, that information is also available to all the other ships in this 200-kilometer range. It is not that it's available only with one ship. So each ship is networked. Real-time information is being exchanged among ships. There are satellites giving a picture. Satellite surveillance is also there. If the satellites pick up something, that information is passed on to the ships. All this information is collated and then analyzed on the carrier, on the command ship, where the fleet commander is or whoever is there, who then decides which ship is to be deployed where to take on what target. So if you look at it, the whole concept of naval warfare is not about ship versus ship. It's more about covering an area and not about covering just a ship. From a submariner's perspective, a submarine inherently has the advantage of both stealth and concealment. Because it is underwater, moving very slowly and very quietly, nobody really knows where exactly is it. Its exact position. That's why the surface forces are always trying to find a submarine at sea. A submarine's role is to basically lurk under the water. It's not doing high speed, it's lurking, waiting for the enemy to come near it and then carry out an attack. Uh, the surface of the ocean and the waves also play a large role in this because unlike the electromagnetic spectrum in the air, where there is no major disturbance, underwater you have only sound waves which travel. You don't have electromagnetic waves which can travel. Sound waves are affected by the temperature of the water, by the salinity of the water. That means how saline is the seawater there, and the pressure, and that which means the depth at which you're operating. All these three factors decide the sound velocity for that particular time of day. And this can change many times in a day, depending on the water temperature changing, because it could be during the daytime when the sun is shining, the water will be warmer. At night, the water will be cooler. Things like that. Sometimes salinity changes. If there's a lot of rain, if it's rained very heavily, certain areas the salinity reduces because so much fresh water has come into that area of the sea. So all these factors have to be taken into account, and that is why submarines have to operate in a manner where they ensure that they remain quiet and they detect the surface force before the surface force can detect the submarine, so that they can carry out their attack on the surface force and disappear from there before the surface force comes to know they're there. Because if the surface force comes to know there's a submarine, it can bring a lot of pressure on the submarine. Helicopters will come and start dropping depth charges. Ships will come there. Ships will start firing torpedoes and dropping depth charges. So you can make a life for a submarine quite difficult. But if the submarine is able to successfully carry out an attack before the ships have realized it is there, it has an inherent advantage. So in a way, that's why we now say naval warfare is not unidimensional, it is multidimensional. There is space involved in it, there is cyber involved in it, there is now artificial intelligence involved in it because weapons are doing predictive analysis. There's precision targeting involved in it. There are submarines, that means undersea environment involved. The air is involved because there are aircraft in the air, there are helicopters in the air, there are satellites in space, and there are surface ships on the surface. So it's a multiple combination of a multi-domain environment that shapes naval warfare today. And it is not the good old days where ship versus ship or submarine versus submarine used to happen. And that is why it is very often we hear that, oh, so and so has got so many submarines, but we have only so many submarines. That doesn't matter. It is not about submarine versus submarine or ship versus ship. It is about capability. What is the total naval capability the enemy can bring to bear on you? And do you have the capability to counter that? You may have less submarines, you may have more aircraft, you may have more weapons, you may have more missiles. So it's about a total combination of your overall naval capability that will decide how well you can fight your war and whether you can win the war or not at sea. So that is how the whole thing is changed. Earlier, because technology was not so advanced, like when we were talking about the Karachi attack, the missile boats had to reach within 50 or 60 miles of Karachi to launch their missiles, or 30 miles of Karachi. Now they can do it from off Mumbai. They can do it from 200 miles away. They don't have to go there. So that question of having to tow them there and they're susceptible to anti-aircraft fire and all that will not be there at all. Similarly, submarines. Now submarines can fire missiles from 750 kilometers away on land targets. That means I can target Islamabad from the sea. I can target a specific target in Islamabad from the sea. I can say, okay, go and hit the military headquarters in Islamabad. That missile will go and hit the military headquarters in Islamabad from 300 miles out at sea. So that is the sort of incremental, technological advancement that has happened in naval warfare. And that is why it has become it's much larger in scope and in scale in the modern day. And that's why navies have become so important now. Does that answer your question to some extent? It will come out as your questions come, you will understand better.
Since you highlighted the multi-dimensional nature of the kind of naval warfare that we have in the 21st century, and we recently heard in the news that the government is all set for the theaterization of an integrated commands for all the three forces. Sir, will that somewhere supplement or complement the situation for the Indian Navy for the better coordination?
Yes, of course. Why are we doing theaterization? We're doing theaterization for two or three reasons. One, warfare is no longer restricted to one service. It's not it'll never be a land war or an air war or a maritime war. It will be a combined war. If you have to win a war, you have to be equally good on land, in the air, and at sea. And you have to be able to complement all these capabilities together to deliver a decisive attack on the enemy or to decisively shape the outcome of the war. And that's why it's very important that all these three services must work very closely together. Now we've seen it working. 1971 war was a classic example of the Army, Navy, and Air Force working closely together, but they were not jointly structured. They were individual services. They just worked very well together because the leadership was very good. Now what they're trying to do is make it institutionalize this jointmanship in the form of theaterization. Because if you have theaterization, firstly, you save on a lot of duplication. Otherwise the Navy also has to get the same thing, the Air Force will also get the same thing, the Army. So three times the amount of money is spent. The government doesn't have that kind of spare money to spend on military weaponry. Now you can optimize what is the actual requirement, because the Navy's effort will also come into that, the Air Force effort will also come into that, even if it's happening on land. Similarly, at sea. So in our case, let me take the maritime dimension. They're talking of setting up a maritime theater command. Now, at the moment, if you look at India, it has one naval command on its west coast in Mumbai, and one naval command on its east coast in Vishakhapatnam, and one naval command in Cochin in the south. So it has three commands. If you see how India is located in the Indian Ocean, jutting out into the center of the Indian Ocean, if you turn the map, world map upside down, you realize there's a huge body of water on top, which is the Indian Ocean, and there is one country which is coming out like that, into the center of the Indian Ocean. That is India. So we are surrounded by water on three sides. So effectively, if you look at it, we have three maritime theaters. We have a Western maritime theater. We have to worry about West Asia. We have lots of interest in West Asia. Our energy comes from there. Our oil comes from there. Our diaspora, which is in the Gulf countries, is the biggest contributor of foreign exchange to the country. So that side is very important. The eastern seaboard is very important because firstly, we have the Andaman Nicobar Islands, which are very strategically located. You have China, which is your biggest concern at the moment, is located on your east. It will approach from the east. You have a lot of other countries on the east, which you have almost 40% of your trade interactions with these countries. And then there's the south, which is the larger Indian Ocean, where you have to protect yourself from any threat coming from anywhere. So India actually effectively has three theaters in the maritime domain. So why are we having only one maritime theater command? The reason we're having one maritime theater command is because these three commands will all report into the central maritime theater commander, who will then decide how is the best way to deploy the Navy across all three theaters, all three areas. What is required where is the priority? Because otherwise, let's say Western Naval Command has got 20 helicopters, Eastern Naval Command has got 10 helicopters. Eastern Naval Command says, I need 5 more helicopters for this attack. Whom is he going to ask? Western Naval Command will say, I'm using my 20 helicopters. So the Maritime Theatre Commander will say, no, at the moment the threat is more grave in the east. Shift 5 helicopters from the west to the east now. So, it will bring in a lot of complementarity. Similarly, the Maritime Theatre Command will have its own Air Force element. Certain Air Force, like the Sukhois, certain aircraft like that, will be permanently available to the Navy as and when they're required at sea. It is not that we will have to ask the Air Force, can you spare us 5 aircraft, please? We want to carry out an attack at sea. These aircraft are meant for that. They will be used for that. Their pilots will be trained for that. Everything will be done for them to be part of the Maritime Theatre Command. Similarly, the Army, amphibious, protection of islands. If we have to land troops to protect our islands, or we want to go and take over an island somewhere, expeditionary warfare, we need troops who are trained in amphibious warfare. We can't pull out 2 divisions from China, from the Chinese border at 17,000 feet and say, oh, now go into amphibious warfare in the seas and go take over that island. Those guys are not trained for it. They're trained for something else. So theaterization will bring in this joint complementarity to our capability and optimize our strengths to meet a particular threat. That is why we're doing theaterization. And theaterization is the way to go. Most modern armed forces are comprised of theater commands. There are very few standalone commands. And the good thing is that we are not rushing into this. Everyone initially thought we are rushing into theater command. We are thinking it through very carefully. The Chief of Defense Staff and his team are examining every possible element before they agree on it or disagree on it or whatever, or they implement it. The reason for that is we are a country which has got 2 permanent enemies sitting on our doorstep. We cannot afford to be weak because we are trying to restructure our military. We are not sure how it will happen. So the enemy says, this is a good time. Now India is in a weak position because their own military doesn't know how to operate themselves because they're trying to change over to theaters. So the transformation from the present structure towards theater command will have to be absolutely seamless, with no weakness coming in anywhere, no vulnerability coming up anywhere in the structure which the enemy can exploit. Pakistan and China are sniping at our heels all the time. They will just wait for an opportunity like this they may not fight a war with us, but to create problems for us. What I personally call nuisance value. So that is why I think theaterization is firstly very important, and I think we are going about it in a very systematic and methodical way without rushing into it just because it's a fashionable thing to do.
Yes, sir. So you rightly pointed out the kind of technological advancements that we are undergoing through it. So just to make it more clear, so we are actually at the age where most of the people highlight a thing that there is no differentiation between state and non-state actors when it is going to be the threat pertained on your horizon. So how do you think that the kind of gray warfare zone is the term, or the asymmetrical warfare zones, that is going to shape the future of the Indian Navy, especially in a very turbulent environment in the Indo-Pacific?
That's a very interesting question you've raised, because there is a perception that the nature of the maritime threat at sea has changed. That traditional maritime threats are no longer the most important aspect, and non-traditional threats are taking over, are becoming more sort of prominent. Piracy, maritime terrorism, illegal migration, gun running, narcotic smuggling, etc., etc., etc. And state-on-state conflict is receding into the background. We don't see so much of that happening. I think that is a misnomer. Navies are fundamentally structured to win a war for your country. They're a military arm. Their job is to defeat an enemy, or to ensure that your territorial integrity is not compromised, or you don't to protect your territorial integrity. Everything else it does is over and above this primary role of war fighting, conventional, traditional war fighting. So navies will continue to be structured like this. You cannot restructure your navy and say, oh, this threat is not important anymore. Let me focus on, let's say, the non-traditional threat. For that, I don't need a big aircraft carrier. I can do, instead of one aircraft carrier, let me make 10 offshore patrol vessels for the same money. Because now I'm going to be using them in piracy, etc. That will be a disaster. Yes, the asymmetric advantage that non-traditional actors have is a factor. For example, when we had a lot of piracy happening of Somalia in 2008, 2009, 2010, more than 20 navies were operating there with their big ships just to counter a small little threat coming from a small little country with young boys in small little boats carrying Kalashnikovs, holding the entire world to ransom by hijacking ships. It took 20 navies more than 5 years to quell this threat, which seemed so innocuous. Some untrained young boys with Kalashnikovs on their shoulders in a small little boat climb a ship and hijack it. But that is the nature of the maritime threat. And the threat was not from those pirates per se, that those boys are going to do anything. The threat was that by what they are doing, the damage they are doing to the global economy was tremendous. To give you another more recent example, now when the Palestine-Hamas conflict, when the Houthi rebels in Yemen started firing on merchant ships transiting through the Red Sea, many shipping lines rerouted their ships around the Cape of Good Hope. They stopped sending them through the Suez Canal and the Red Sea to the Indian Ocean. They routed these ships around the Cape of Good Hope. That added 8,000 miles to their passage, 15 additional days, and a huge amount of cost, both for additional cost for being at sea for longer, and of the delays in delivery of all their products that they were carrying. Everything was delayed by 10 or 15 days. So it totally disrupted the global supply chains. All that had happened was Houthi rebels had started carrying out some attacks on some ships, but it literally shook the foundations of the global economy. That is the importance of the maritime domain for the global economy, and that is why even asymmetric threats cannot be taken lightly. Uh, Non-traditional threats are here to stay; they're not going to go away anywhere. More dangerous than the non-traditional threat is the state-sponsored non-traditional threat, like illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, IUU fishing. China is the world's biggest, IUU culprit. As it is, 20% of the global catch of fishing is IUU. It's illegal, it's unregulated, it's unreported. And China, as a state with its fishing fleet, is the biggest culprit. So when you have state-supported actors and non-state actors working together, it is a threat at sea, because the sea is the medium of connectivity. Trade travels across the sea. The Indian Ocean, through Indian Ocean particularly. If you see the Indian Ocean, it is the ocean that provides the connectivity between the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. That means any trade that has to transit from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean has to go through the Indian Ocean. So the Indian Ocean has more than 100,000 ships that pass through it every year. 100,000 ships. Ensuring that this trade remains safe and this energy remains safe is a major task. Now, the Indian Navy is doing the task remarkably well. When this whole Houthi fracas took place, the Somali pirates again came up near Bab el Mandeb Straits and the Western Indian Ocean. It was the Indian Navy which literally deployed their ships in counter piracy missions and literally neutralized that threat. after about 8 or 10 days. It took a lot of effort. Ships were damaged. They provided support to ships. They repaired the ships, other ships, merchant ships' engines. They rescued the crew. They apprehended pirates. They did everything possible. But they literally neutralized that threat. And that is why the Indian Navy today is considered the preferred security partner in the entire Indo-Pacific region and the first responder in any crisis. Because the Indian Navy, despite being a blue water navy and catering for its fundamental military role, has also paid a lot of attention to ensuring that it meets the challenge of the non-traditional threat and the transnational threat that we are all faced with, which has tremendous potential to do far more damage to the global economy and the global maritime environment than a small, conflict somewhere or the other.
Yes, sir.
I,
Yes, sir. So, since you highlighted the importance of the Indo-Pacific region and the kind of the geography that India have, so as a veteran, how do you see the Indo-Pacific creator? Like in light of the contestations that we have between China and US, and also in terms of the international goods that is being supplied from the Indo-Pacific region. Like the 90% of the trade goes through area. So how do you see the importance of the Indo-Pacific in the coming years?
so look, what has happened in the last 2 decades is that the global center of gravity, the global geopolitical center of gravity and the global geo-economic center of gravity has shifted from what used to be the Euro-Atlantic theater, during the Cold War years to the Indo-Pacific. So Indo-Pacific now is the epicenter of the global geopolitics and geo-economic contestation that is going to take place in the future. India has a pivotal role to play because of its location. India is located bang in the center of the Indian Ocean. The Indian Ocean, as I mentioned, provides the connectivity from the Atlantic to the Pacific and also has another unique feature that it is bound by 5 very critical choke points. Whoever controls these choke points can literally control the passage of trade and energy through the Indian Ocean. Now, why is the Indo-Pacific important? At the moment, 60%, more than 60% of the world's population resides in the Indo-Pacific. And this generates more than two-thirds of the global GDP. So the Indo-Pacific is not only important to the countries of the Indo-Pacific, it is important for the economy of the world. And that is why in the last 2 years or 3 years, if you notice, even very Eurocentric countries like the Netherlands, Germany, who really never really, had a look towards the Indo-Pacific earlier, have all promulgated their own Indo-Pacific strategies. So UK has one, France has one, the EU has one, Canada has one, Germany, Netherlands, each of them have an Indo-Pacific strategy because they realize the importance of the Indo-Pacific. These countries are not going to come militarily and interfere in this region because they don't have the capacity to come and interfere militarily. But they will look to the Indo-Pacific countries, like-minded Indo-Pacific countries like India, Japan, South Korea, Australia, US, the maritime democracies, to ensure that their trade and interests, other interests which are in this region, are protected. And if you read the Indo-Pacific strategies, many of them are focused on how the trade can remain secure. And that is why there has been a distinct shift in the European approach towards India in the last few years. Because they've suddenly realized that India is extremely important for their economic well-being. Because India provides them the security in the Indian Ocean. If you look at the construct of the Indo-Pacific, the most important nations in the Indo-Pacific are the ASEAN nations, China, Japan, South Korea, the US presence, Malaysia, Singapore to a lesser extent because they're smaller countries. All of these countries are located in the Pacific, which is the only country which is considered part of the Indo-Pacific located in the Indian Ocean, India. Nobody looks at Kenya or Tanzania or Nairobi or any of these other countries as Indo. So literally, India is the Indo of the Indo-Pacific. And that is why India is so important in the Indian Ocean to ensure that this trade and all the energy moves safely and securely across these waters. That is why the Indo-Pacific has become important to the world, and that is why the Indo-Pacific is so important for India. Now when you talked about gray zone warfare, this is something China seems to have mastered. They're continuously employing these gray zone tactics. Gray zone tactics basically is something between war and peace. You're creating enough, you're being very belligerent, but you're not allowing it to escalate into a conflict. So war will never break out. You'll carry out a minor attack. They fired water cannon at the Philippine ships, things like that, which are just short of firing a missile or firing a gun. The biggest danger of such gray zone tactics is that in retaliation, it could lead to unintended consequences. Let's say a small Philippine naval ship, hypothetically, is being bombarded with water cannons. At some point, the captain of that ship might get so fed up, he'll say, fire around at them, fire your gun at them, because they're hitting us with water cannons throughout the day. And the moment that happens, there's no telling where the situation will finally end. So gray zone in itself is a very dangerous tactic. This is exactly what China is been doing on the border with India. When Galwan happened, it was nothing but their gray zone, which went out of control for that short period of time. So China's gray zone tactics can only be countered by ensuring that it remains gray zone. So that pressure has to be kept on them that we won't allow you to get away with this. Now, if you see the maritime geography of the Indo-Pacific, China has one fundamental disadvantage. It has a very, very disadvantageous maritime geography. Firstly, it is located in one corner, it's in the Pacific. So if it wants to become the global maritime, a global power, a global dominant power, it will need to spread its influence across the world and not just remain in that part of the world where it is at the moment. For its navy or its maritime element to do that, it has to get out of that because over there the maritime geography is not favorable. There are small islands, there are narrow waterways, there are small countries all around it. It's first island chain, second island chain. So it doesn't have the freedom to operate as a big blue water navy in those waters. For that, China needs more sea space. That sea space comes to China in the Indian Ocean. So when it starts operating in the Indian Ocean in large numbers, once its navy is large enough for that or has the capability, it will be looking to operate as a big blue water power projection navy in the Indian Ocean because Indian Ocean gives it that space to be able to deploy its full might, naval might. And more important than that is the fact that Indian Ocean is what gives it access to the Atlantic. And if China is to become a dominant global power, it has to dominate the Atlantic also. It can't do it just sitting in one part of the Pacific. So for China, the ultimate aim would be to dominate the Indian Ocean and get access to the Atlantic. So the great power contestation that we talk about today between the US and China, while at the moment it's all centered around Taiwan, Taiwan is a red line for China. They will not compromise on Taiwan. That they're very clear. They will not compromise on two things. They will not compromise on China and they will not compromise on the South China Sea. And they will do whatever is in their part to ensure that they control both these things. They will to reunify Taiwan and to exercise full control over the South China Sea. And that is where the fear is that it will lead to conflict, it could lead to confrontation, it could lead to all kinds of things. But that is not where the great game is being played out. That will be happening on the side. The great game or the great power contestation will happen in the Indian Ocean because that is what will give China access to the Atlantic and actual maritime power. If this great power contestation happens in the Indian Ocean, India, which has so far been the undisputed maritime leader in the Indian Ocean, will find itself under pressure. At that time, the Indian Navy and the Indian maritime capability, and when I say maritime capability, I'm not talking of only Navy, I'm talking of its merchant shipping, every element of the maritime domain, because there's a difference between maritime power and naval power. I could explain that later. But that's where the difference between India and China lies. India should have the capacity and the capability at that time, which may be 10 years from now, which may be 15 years from now, we don't know, to be able to influence the outcome of events in the Indian Ocean and not allow itself to get influenced by what is happening with these big powers. We don't want to be that global power, but we should make sure that we have enough power to decide how the Indian Ocean pans out. We should not allow ourselves to be bullied in the Indian Ocean because somebody else has more power available. So that is, I think, where the key of the Indian Ocean in India lies, in the Indo-Pacific. You see, China is already a maritime power. China already has the largest navy in the world. It has the largest merchant fleet in the world. It has the largest fishing fleet in the world. It is the largest shipbuilder in the world. 7 of the world's 10 busiest ports are in China. It has the largest coast guard in the world. It has the largest maritime militia in the world. So in every maritime element, it is number 1 or number 2 in the world. India has a very powerful navy, but we have less than 0.5% of the global shipbuilding share. None of our ports are in the top 25 of the world. So we have a long way to go as a maritime power. We still have to develop that. And I think now the government has recognized that. If you all have heard of something called the Project Sagarmala, which is going on, and the Maritime Vision 2030, you will realize that India is heading in this direction of also augmenting its maritime capability. You see, maritime, anything to be done in the maritime domain takes time, whether you're building a port or you're building a shipyard or you're creating a shipping fleet. It takes time, it takes money. So it'll happen. But we have to remain focused that we have to make this happen. It can't be, up and down and okay, so next 5 years we'll work on it, then some the new government will say, no, no, we don't want to give so much money for this. It can't work that way. It has to be a sustained effort. China has sustained this effort for more than 4 decades to reach where it has today as a maritime power. So India in the future has to be a maritime power. India has to shape the Indo of the Indo-Pacific, and that it can do by ensuring that the Pacific of the Indo-Pacific of China, etc., are not able to call the shots in our part of the world. So broadly, that is the geopolitical dynamics of the Indo-Pacific at the moment and the Indian perspective towards that. I hope I have not confused you all too much. I hope it's sort of clear.
No, sir. So now it's a time to just get into the social dimension of the Indian Navy per se. That is to that the inclusion of women into the Indian Navy. So for that, I would like to invite Anamitra ma'am. Ma'am, are you here?
Yes, Nandini, I'm so sorry. Just my camera is a little malfunctioning. I'm not able to switch on my camera. I hope that is all right. My
Fine,
sincere
ma'am.
apologies. My compliments to Commodore Singh. Thank you, sir, for the lovely insight. I'll just add on quickly to one of the things that you said regarding the Indo-Pacific theater, and this is from a very personal knowledge because when I was pursuing my bachelor's in geophysics, and there was two theories that we were being taught, that one was the heartland theory and the rimland theory. And if I remember very clearly, the entire concepts about these two theories, it all focused on the Indo-Pacific theater. Nowhere in the European, even the Europeans in the 20th century, they already understood what was the value of this Indo-Pacific theater. So
Yes.
the entire colonization and the all everything, it all played out in this entire segment. It did not happen in the Atlantic Ocean. It did not happen in the Pacific Ocean as such. But as
Yeah.
per se, the Indian Ocean was the where you can get to see the maximum of colonization that have taken place. Just a small addition from my side.
Yeah.
Because of the geography, again, it is because of the geography, nothing more. But geography is the one which actually determines the geopolitics that actually unveils. Now, coming to your question regarding the inclusion of women in Indian Navy. Now, first of all, Nandini, I'm really sorry to say I beg to differ a bit. I'm not very much of a feminist, but I believe in equal opportunity. And the journey of the women in Indian Navy, it has began since World War II, if I'm correct. And it was when they had supported, in supporting roles within the Royal Indian Navy. But it was only until 1990s that the Indian Navy had officially started inducting women primarily into the medical and the education corps. So it was not that there was no representation of women in the Indian Navy or something of that sort, because there were already women who were in their supporting roles within the Royal Indian Navy. And if you ask me what is the current status of women, or if there is equal opportunities and representation of women in the Indian Navy, in just small, I'll just give you, in some small examples. For example, if you take in December 2023, the INS Trincut, right? It went on a Navika Sagar Parikrama, and it was by an all-woman crew, right? Which was on board on the INSV Tarini as well, and it spanned around 22,000 nautical miles, where there had been storms, freezing conditions in the Southern Ocean, and other daunting challenges. So somewhere the Navy is committed to inclusivity. And then again in 2022, if I see the first Indian Naval Air Squadron, which made headlines because of the first all-woman independent maritime reconnaissance mission that took place in the North Arabian Sea. Now, the Navy's vision for the future is always ambitious and forward looking. As it integrates more and more into operational leadership roles, it is still exploring the potential avenues from combat roles on the submarines to command position on the aircraft carriers. And definitely, we also had seen that, where there has been people who have taken up in the command leadership as well. And of course, Commodore Jaising will be the person who will tell you exactly, where in his service time he has seen there has been comparatively, women have performed well as well. So the women officers in Navy, as per my own experience, whatever the little experience that I've seen in my own small little career, I've seen they're accorded equality in all aspects of service, their duties, job specification, be the training, working condition, promotion, the pay and the allowances, service conditions. and it is as per as their male counterparts. There is no gender discrimination. I repeat, there is no gender discrimination. And whether a particular officer, be it a male or a female, it is always planned with the aim of best utilization of their qualification, their talent, their expertise, their aptitude, their experience, whatever they have gained in various tenures. So there is no discrimination. Of course, due to certain constraints, women at that moment, they are not deployed in the combat areas, but we can definitely see those things might come up in the future. That will be all in brief regarding women leadership in Navy. Thank you. Sir, you're on mute, I guess. Sir, you're on mute.
Can I just add a bit to that about
Yes,
women
yes,
in the
please,
Navy?
please, please, please.
Now, when I joined the Navy, obviously there were no women in it. I'm talking of 1980, and we started inducting women officers in the early 90s. I was an XO of a submarine second in command. Of course, submarines didn't have women officers; they still don't have. That will happen by and by. But we all were a little concerned as to how will they shape up, will they understand the naval, ethos, etc., etc. We treated them initially with kid gloves, saying that they're girls basically, and so they need to be. We were very chivalrous with them. They always got preferential treatment everywhere because that's how we were brought up to believe that women need to be respected. So that was the initial years, the first 2 3 years. But as Anamitra said, we have had women in the armed forces for many many years as doctors. The military nursing service is largely manned by lady officers, and they've been at the front line in field ambulances and everywhere where the army's been. They've served on ships. Presently itself, the Director General of the Armed Forces Medical Services, the highest ranking medical officer in the country, is a lady officer, Surgeon Vice Admiral Arti Serene. The Director General Medical Services of the Navy, Surgeon Vice Admiral Kavita Sahai, is a lady officer. So they've had 30 or 40 years of service in the Navy. They've marched shoulder to shoulder with the men, with their counterparts. They have served on ships as doctors. They've been attached to the army and gone to high altitude areas and served as doctors. So they've done everything a male doctor does from a physical perspective. As far as their professional knowledge goes, they are second to none. They are experts in their field. And as Anamitra very rightly brought out, in the Indian Armed Forces, there is no discrimination. You are treated, whether you're a man or a woman, you're treated on your merit. That is as far as the doctors go. Now, when I come to the role of women subsequently, in the Navy, nobody ever doubted the capability of women to stand shoulder to shoulder with men on board ships in combat roles. That was never doubted. It was never felt that they will be found wanting in any way. What was of greater concern, I think, was the fact that our ships were not designed to accommodate women. India has still not reached that social emancipation of the West where women and men can, share a bunk or share a toilet or share a bed in a 6 bunk cabin together. They change in front of each other like they do in Europe. It will not be accepted by Indian society yet. So our ships had to be, firstly, when we introduced lady officers on board ships, we cordoned off certain areas on ships and said, this is accommodation only for the ladies, no men are allowed over there. Or these are the toilets the ladies will use, no men are allowed over there. But that was, cordoning off certain areas of a ship which was never designed specifically for them. But all our modern ships now are being designed keeping in mind a certain element of a women crew on board, whether it's for officers or it's for sailors. So far, we only had officers on board. Now we're recruiting sailors also. That means they are going to be working with the men and getting their hands actually dirty, loading a weapon or maintaining an engine or doing whatever they are. So they are in no way less than men in any respect. It was more the social constraints in a country in India where social morals and people are very conventional and people are very traditional. So we didn't want to be in a position where awkward situations would come up because of these kind of things. And parents saying, our daughter's being put in a bunk where she has to, in a cabin where she has to share a bed with 3 other men or share a bunk with 3 other men. So that kind of thing was, I think, what was holding things back. Now that our ships are being designed in such a way that they can accommodate women officers and women sailors, we have them on board. We don't have them on submarines yet. That will happen by and by. Abroad, the reason why women were actually allowed on submarines in Germany and other countries was because they didn't have enough men who could man those submarines. That was the reason. It was not because they were trying to be equal, not because of gender equality, but because they didn't have enough men. India at the moment, we have enough men. Submarines are a whole different beast altogether. The proximity of people is that proximity can create uncomfortable situations. It has done abroad in many cases. Uh, a German commanding officer, German submarine commanding officer, was removed from her command because she was having an affair with a male sailor. So things like that will happen, but that will happen. I mean, that's the world, you know. So I don't think it's an issue anymore. And of course, I'm talking of the day to day. What Anamitra mentioned was these two girls who gone on a round the world cruise now on a sailing ship. That's, I think, a tremendous achievement. And the earlier things that she mentioned, those of course are standout achievements. Or women expedition going to Everest. These are standout events. But day to day Navy, the men and women are now getting more and more closely integrated to work as a single unit, which I think is a very, very positive sign. And I think it is reflective of the fact that there is no gender bias, and people have accepted the fact that this is the future. I mean, whether you like it or not, it doesn't matter whether you may be the biggest male chauvinist pig going around, but you now have to work. Your commanding officer could be a woman, and you have to follow her orders whether you like them or you don't like them, whatever patriarchal background you may have come from. So I think that's important. And last year, just to mention, at the moment there is a husband and wife. There's a couple. Both the husband and wife are commanding ships independently. So we've reached that level. So I think it's a great achievement. And I can assure you that women have more than held their own and proved their worth in the Navy and will continue to do so in the years to come.
So that was a very enlightening discussions of the inclusion of women. So my question to you is regarding the current efforts of the Indian Navy regarding the indigenizations of the uh, naval, like the kind of the efforts that the Indian Navy is coming through, whether it be it's the INS Arighat recently or the Arihant. So how do you think, sir, in the future, in the comparative perspective, Indian Navy can reach its ambition through the projects or through the initiatives of to attain the goal of ambitious goal of indigenization and the defense production?
See, I'll tell you, the Indian Navy has always been at the forefront of indigenization among the three forces, among the Army, Navy, and the Air Force. Ever since 1972, when INS Nilgiri was a British Leander class design, was built in Mazagon Docks Limited, Bombay, the first big ship to be built in India. The Indian Navy has not looked back. We built 6 of those, and we followed them with Godavari class, and we followed them with Brahmaputra class, and we followed them with Shivalik class. Now we follow on Shivaliks. We're building destroyers, we build tankers. So that program is continuing. Frigates, destroyers, smaller ships, corvettes, and all we've been building and will continue to build. In fact, at the moment, the Chief of Naval Staff, I don't know if he mentioned it in his press conference or not 2 days ago, but of the 60 odd ships being built in India, 60 odd ships and submarines under construction, only 2 are coming from abroad. The rest are all being built in Indian shipyards. They're designed in India, built in India. Yes, they do have foreign equipment. That will happen for some more time. And certain equipment will always be imported because you can't start making every nut and bolt in India. That is not the meaning of indigenization. But at the moment, we have achieved a very high degree of indigenization. So, in the Navy, we generally calculate these things on 3 elements: the float element of a ship, the move element of a ship, and the fight element of a ship. Now, the float element of a ship is the basic hull structure, the basic hull of the ship, and the superstructure of the ship, which helps the ship float. Which, if you put it in water, it won't sink. It won't move, but it won't sink. So, in the float element, I think we have achieved more than 90% indigenization at the moment, maybe nearing 100%. All the steel being used to build Indian warships is made in India, as is a lot of composites, as is a lot of other machinery, other equipment, doors, hatches, windows, things like that. Then we come to the move element. The move element means what moves the ship. That means its propellers, its engines, its generators, its power generation, electrical alternators, various systems that propel, the hydraulic system, the pneumatic system, the suction system, various systems that help propel a ship. In that, we are at the verge of, I think, about 70 odd percent indigenization. Unfortunately, one of the main areas where we need to indigenize and haven't done so far is marine engines. So all engines that are fitted on our ships are coming from abroad. But that is now a sincere effort is being made to indigenize marine engines in India. And if tomorrow the Indian Navy shifts to electric propulsion as it plans to do, then electric motors will be built in India. So I think that percentage also will increase in the next few years. Then we come to the third element, the fight element. Now, the fight element is basically what is required for a ship to fight. That means weapons, sensors, and things like electronic warfare, etc., etc. In that, we are at about 50 to 50% or 60%. Most of the all radars more or less are built in India. All the communication equipment on a ship is built in India. All the navigation equipment on a ship is built in India. All its electronic warfare capability is Indian. But there are still certain weapon systems and certain sensors which we have not reached that level of indigenization where we can confidently fit them on our ships. In all those cases, the days of buying from abroad are over. Even now, when we go to a foreign company and say we need, let's say, hypothetically, a missile, let's say, 10, we don't just buy a missile. We say, look, we will only buy a missile from you if it is built by an Indian company with your technological expertise. And you will give 50, at least 50% indigenization should be there, or 60% indigenization should be there. That means this is probably the last time we are coming to you to buy a foreign weapon. Next time, the next one will be built in India. So we are moving very rapidly towards this. You know, the Prime Minister has given us clarion call for Make in India and Atmanirbharta or self-reliance. The defense is a key sector in this. If India is to become a big global power, it cannot afford to be vulnerable when it comes to its military capability. It should not be that somebody can hold us hostage and say, I will put sanctions on you so you will not get this equipment and that will make you vulnerable. That should not happen. That means even if we are not building each and every nut and bolt in India, we should be in a position that we can deliver a system in India, built in India, and thereafter maintain it for the rest of its service life in India. That doesn't have to go back to the parent company, or no spares have to come from the parent company. So that is self-reliance. We should be self-reliant in our defense requirements so that nobody can hold us to ransom if we have to be a big power. Otherwise, we'll always have that weakness that somebody can put sanctions on us. It happened after the nuclear explosion of 1998. The Western world sanctioned us. Even now, if you remember, a couple of years ago, they were talking of, because we were buying the S-400 system, USA was contemplating putting their CATSA sanctions on us, which didn't happen. But so that threat always remains. That is something we have to avoid. And that is why indigenization is so important. And the Indian Navy is well on that path. And with the government sort of push, wherever there were areas where we were probably a little slow, also we've had to speed up now. And the good thing is that this message has gone out to all the foreign companies also. So even when foreign companies come to India to do business, they don't come and say, okay, just buy this gun from me or buy this sonar from me. They say, okay, now let me find a good Indian partner. Let me see what I can do with him, because ultimately the order is going to go to the Indian company. So if I want to be part of this big business in India, I have to partner with an Indian company. I have to give him technology. I have to help him build the equipment and not sell it myself. So that is why this has been extremely positive. And this has been across the board in all the three services. It will take time. Again, indigenization is an expensive process. You know, companies have to establish that infrastructure firstly. Infrastructure is expensive. There has to be return on investment. You can't tell a company that, look, I want you to spend $2 billion in creating a capability to build this missile, but I will only buy 5 missiles from you after that. He'll say, I'm not going to spend $2 billion and get no profit on it. What happens after those 5 missiles are delivered? What will I do with this $2 billion investment which I made? So the government has to create a policy environment where the support is given. So you tell that guy, look, you give me 5 missiles initially, if they work well, I'll order another 25 from you. Then he'll make that $2 billion investment or $1 billion investment, whatever. Otherwise, he'll say it's not worth my while. After all, he's a businessman. He's not there for charity. His company will shut down. So this balance of what we need and what we need to create has to be shaped by a very favorable policy environment, enabling policy environment by the government of India, where this kind of support is given to industry, that don't worry, you deliver what we want and we will hold your hand. We will not let you down. This is now coming into shape. Many policies have come and many policies have gone, promulgated by the Ministry of Defense, but now we are seeing a very focused approach. And that, I think, focused approach will what will help us achieve much higher level, much higher degree of indigenization than we have already. So the future is bright, because this message has gone home loud and clear to the globe that India is not, in the next few years, India is not going to buy any equipment from abroad. They will collaborate with foreign companies for them to come and make it in India for them. So that is the bottom line message on indigenization.
So since the time constraint, so the last question to you is, sir, do you think there still exists a kind of continental bias in the India's strategic planning among the security mandarins of the country?
I think it's changing. Yes, there has always been a continental bias. There's good reason for it, because ever since independence, our maritime frontiers have never really been threatened, but our borders have always been threatened by two major adversaries on our nuclear powered adversaries, one on our west, one in our north. So it has definitely shaped the narrative so far and the strategic discourse in the country. We fought wars on land over borders, and at the end of the day, like I always say, and I don't know if you've heard of a person called Julian Corbett. Julian Corbett was a very famous maritime strategist of the early 20th century. And he always said that, one of the things he said was, great matters will always be decided on land because that is where people live. It will not be decided at sea, So ultimately, if you see the Indian immediate environment, the final battle will be decided on land. It will be about boundaries, it will be about territory, it will be about borders. It will not be at sea. Sea will be complementing the ultimate battle on land. So that is the role I think the Navy understands. We have to ensure that the maritime domain is not threatened. The Navy has to ensure that the maritime domain is never threatened. And that is why we need certain capabilities. Those capabilities are expensive. For example, building an aircraft carrier or building a nuclear submarine. Now, India is, I forgot to mention this earlier. You had referred to Arigat. India is only one of 6 countries in the world which has indigenously built both an aircraft carrier and a ballistic missile nuclear submarine. Now, this is a tremendous, tremendous achievement for any country's industrial skills, technological skills, government support, the Navy support, and a very comprehensive sort of understanding of the complexity of these two platforms. And the fact that we've been able to do it is very, very credible. And now we must build on this capability and ensure that we don't let it go to waste. So as I was saying, so the maritime domain is getting due attention. As I said, almost 60 ships and submarines are under construction. But yes, the focus has been continental for many years. This actually started with when the Mughals came and the Muslim invaders came from across the Himalayas. That our whole focus shifted from maritime when the Chola kingdoms of the south sort of declined and the Muslims and the Mughals dominated. It was more continental, and that sort of prevailed. But in a contemporary scenario, uh, both Pakistan and China do remain adversaries. We have to focus our attention on them. But I don't think the maritime domain is getting neglected. It's getting its due attention. The Navy will always be happy with more, but it's quite happy with what it has got at the moment and whatever share of the defense budget it gets at the moment. So I think we don't have to really worry on that account.
So since one of the functions still pertains to the domain is the kind of the naval diplomacy, the credibility of the naval diplomacy that has to be given due recognitions in the field. So how do you think the kind of the naval diplomacy that we still require to just address the kind of strategic challenges that we are going through the region?
You
In
know,
terms of,
sorry, yeah, please go ahead. Sorry.
yes, sir, I've just completed my
Okay, so
question.
navies are probably the most effective instruments of a nation's foreign policy in peacetime. Uh, Oliver Cromwell, in the 1600s, had said, a man of war, ships were called men of war at that time. A man of war is my best ambassador because they can go from anywhere to anywhere. They can show the country's flag in friendship, they can show the country's flag in anger with their presence. We can send a carrier battle group 5,000 miles away, either to show our friendship to that country or to put pressure on that country. What we call coercive diplomacy or gunboat diplomacy. Similarly, trade. Now, if you can block a country's trade or let it happen, that is again a form of diplomacy. So, your foreign policy objectives, you want to project power. You want to project power in the Indian Ocean. India wants to show itself as a major Indian Ocean power or a major Indo-Pacific power. It is the Navy it will use to reflect that power. The Navy will be able to deploy anywhere. It will go and exercise with navies across the world. So the Navy is, in peacetime, as I said, the most effective instrument of a nation's foreign policy because it is physically present where you want it to be, when you want it to be, and to do what you want it to do, what your country wants to do. What is the kind of message you want to send? The Navy is effectively able to send it. You could go and provide succor and relief in a humanitarian crisis with show your soft power diplomacy. You can go with 10 ships and surround a country and show your hard power diplomacy, which is what, then of course the third aspect is defense diplomacy. People coming for courses to India, training in India. Now, if you train lots of people, let's say from friendly foreign navies in India, they will go back with an understanding of the Indian Navy. They will go back with an understanding of what India does. They will go back with an understanding of how things are shaped in India. Why does India do what it does? All that helps. We do exercises. We exercise with more than 45 navies. So when you exercise with navies, you understand why they are operating the way they are operating. They see how efficient your ships are. You see how efficient their ships are. you know, the first ever Singapore India submarine exercise. Well, I was conducting that exercise way back in '94. I sailed on the Singapore naval ship with the Chief of Navy for 1 week. So I very closely saw how effectively and efficient the Singapore Navy is because I was on that ship for a whole week. So, things like this. So, the Navy has a tremendous role to play in diplomacy. Courses, training, transfer of equipment. We gave a submarine to Myanmar 3 years ago as a sign of our deep cooperation with Myanmar when we were trying, when the civilian government came to power in Myanmar, we sort of we sort of extended a hand in friendship. And towards that, we said, okay, we will support you with our military diplomacy. We gave them a submarine. Now, no country, very few countries give another country something as big as a submarine. But we gave them a submarine for that reason. That, unfortunately, a military junta coup happened, and the submarine is still with them, though we are not so friendly with Myanmar anymore. But the fact is, these are the kind of messages which go home loud and clear and convey your friendship, your commitment, etc. So India's Sagar policy, I don't know if you heard of something called Sagar. Sagar is an acronym for Security and Growth for All in the Region. This was announced by Prime Minister Modi in 2015 when he visited Mauritius. Now, since most of the activity in the maritime domain is underpinned by security, whether it's energy security, trade security, food security, any security, basically security underpins every activity, fishing, underpins every activity in the maritime domain. Our entire foreign policy in the Indo-Pacific is shaped by our Sagar policy. How much we want to engage with which country is shaped by what we want to do with that country. For example, Mauritius, for example, Sri Lanka, for example, Mauritius. All of these are underwritten by Sagar. So it's a very close interrelation between defense policy and foreign policy. And the Navy is probably the most effective platform or the most effective service to exercise this because oceans unite, land borders divide. So, there's no land border, there's no line dividing two countries at sea. Every maritime country is another maritime country's neighbor at sea, however far it might be in terms of miles. So that's why navies are effective instruments of diplomacy.
Hello, Anil. You have muted yourself. Hello. Ah,
Now am I audible? Yeah. So Anamitra ma'am would love if you add something into it.
Just wanted to say certain things, like rightly sir has pointed out everything, and it doesn't leave much scope for me as well to add in more. But please remember that naval diplomacy is not same as maritime diplomacy. Maritime diplomacy is a huge aspect. Okay, naval diplomacy is more, as sir has mentioned, that navies are actually the instruments of foreign policy. So it's a subset of the maritime policy, right? Now, there's also one more thing that I wanted to, give you as an insight, that a lot of people think that, some British guy, the British theorist, Ken Booth, he's the founder of this term called naval diplomacy in one of his policy papers in 1977. But the truth is that it actually, for Indian context, it actually stemmed out from one of our former diplomat and statesman, that is K.M. Panikkar. He had given in 1945. So if you have some, kind of a knowledge or lack or something, if you have that knack for going and looking it up, please go ahead and have a look, right? He had
This is Panikkal's
exactly.
book.
Yes,
This is
sir.
Panikkal's
Oh,
book.
yes, sir. Yes,
This is
sir.
a book.
So yes, that is one
So
of
I suggest
the.
everyone should read this essay by Panikkar, India and the Indian Ocean.
So
Sorry,
that is
Anamitra, sorry.
the foundation of our all, naval diplomacy and how things should actually fall into place. He is such a visionary person. He had actually given out the outlines, how navies should in future it should function, what should have been taken place. And as sir in his opening statements, he had also stated that in before 1971 people used to think that navy was just being overshadowed by Indian Army and Indian Air Force. It is absolutely right. It is only after Operation Trident that the Indian government actually gave a thought, and they actually brought in certain plans, and they had a strategic vision for the Indian Navy. And then they had, segmented certain policies. Like they had a long-term policy in the 1978, if I'm not wrong. Then there were certain things that have actually also simultaneously that have taken place. There is also something which is called the Indian Maritime Doctrine. I don't know if you have heard about it. So that also provides a comprehensive framework for the Navy's role. Post the Cold War context, it also integrates some kind of emerging challenges and opportunities, enumerating some kind of critical concepts. Like you have the network centric operation. What is network centric operation? It leverages technology for seamless command and control. Then there is a mention of cybersecurity and electronic warfare, where it gives out how to address asymmetrical threats in the digital age. Then there is something called naval bridge building and multilateralism, where you foster regional cooperation and partnerships. Can be anything. Then there is peace support operations, like Sir was mentioning, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, which actually is iconic of India's soft power. And of course, you have the coalition of the naval partnerships, where you get to enhance interoperability with the friendly navies. So there is also one more thing that I wanted to add, that is that a lot of you might not know that Indian Navy also plays an instrumental role in protection of our slogs. That is the sea lines of communication. And please understand, sea line of communication is not same as shipping lines. Shipping lines are much more, narrower in passage. Slogs are much more wider, and in lot of times, even our ammunition and arms also move through that slogs. Okay, so these are all in brief. I think so. If you want to add something more, you can please go ahead and add.
No, no, thank you for giving these additional points. I think, yeah, they're very useful and very important, what Anamitra has just said, particularly on maritime power. Difference between, differentiating between naval and maritime is very, very important. Most people don't do that. They take one as, they think they both mean the one and the same thing. And secondly, yes, there's this differentiation between sea lanes and slogs, because slog protection is a very, very major role for any navy. And particularly, like I said, with 90% of our trade coming over the sea and our 80% of our energy, it becomes extremely critical for us to ensure its safety. But yes, very important points brought out, Anmitra. Thank you.
So
So I
even I think to some extent, even Indian Navy has played an important role in the UN troop contribution as well. I don't think that can also be looked out, because somewhere Indian Navy, I mean, we are right now the third or the third. I mean, I might not be good with the statistics. Might be the second or the third largest troop contribution countries in the UN. So somewhere
Largest,
even
largest. We are the largest.
okay, sir. So last year it was Bangladesh. Now probably it has moved up now.
Yeah.
So that is also very critical. So please understand that we are much more than just about the navies. We are all about protection of our neighborhood, and also our policies of look east policy and look west policy have shifted and made it into a neighborhood policy, which means the protection of the entire of the IOR, just not only restricted to our coastlines of the 75,000 kilometers, but it's a huge kind of a role that Indian Navy is actually incorporating. And of course, Indian Navy is on the forefront of the Indigenization, and it has been happening since the 70s, even when the technological denials and of the transfer of technology was taking place. From that era itself, Indian Navy was looking out for ways how to upgrade their vessels, upgrade their machinery, and also have that kind of a fast forward outlook. So that has always been there. That will be all.
So I really thank this team panel to join us on this occasion. And this is an announcement for all the participants that you'll get your participation certificates very soon via mail. And thank you so much, sir. Your this visions was uh, just just made me wordless to say. And thank you so much for joining and just give the insights that we probably didn't know before.
No, I think that's a great initiative you all have taken. And I wish Indian netizens all the best. You're all young students, bright minds. You're going to shape the future of our country in the next 30, 40 years. So wish you all the very best, and I hope all of you sort of understand these dynamics, so that you can form your opinions and take your decisions in life accordingly. Thank you very much for making me a part of this, and thank you, Anamitra, for those very useful inputs and your contribution as well. Thank you,
Thank you,
and wish
sir.
you all a
Thank you
very
so
happy
much.
wish you all a very happy Navy
Happy
Day.
Navy Day to you, sir. Thank you very
Thank
much
you.
to the Indian netizens as well. Thank you, Nandini, for your lovely moderation, and thank you, Commodore Jaising, sir. I had the opportunity to meet you personally when in my earlier appointment when I was working in St. George under leadership
Ah,
of General Shivastav. I
Yes.
moved out from there. I'm currently working in somewhere else. So, but it's really nice every time that I meet you. Thank you so much for your lovely
No, it's a
insight.
pleasure.
It's an
Where are you working
absolute
now?
pleasure working with you. So
Where are
I'm
you working now?
actually currently in headquarter ideas only. I cannot say the
Okay.
name of
Okay.
the
So you're with the
organization.
headquarters ideas.
Yes, sir.
You're not with
I'm
the
actually in
company.
headquarter ideas, but at the
Yeah.
same time, since I'm also part of JK Policy Institute, so
Uh-huh.
I regularly contribute that. But
Yeah.
my earlier appointment was with Senjos under the think tank itself, but
Yeah.
now
Yeah.
I've moved into
Yeah.
the main building. Thank you,
Yeah.
sir.
So my last appointment in service was in IDS. I was the DASID's Maritime in
Okay,
Perspective
okay,
Plan.
okay, sir. Okay, sir. Okay,
PPNFD. Yeah. Yeah.
okay, sir. Okay.
Yeah.
Sir, I want to ask a question, sir.
Yeah. Please.
Sir, the question is from between our American Navy and Indian Navy. That, sir, we have only one Navy regiment that used to protect our sea coast and protect our waters, like Indian Ocean, like Arabian Sea, and like Bay of Bengal. But for America, they have two divisions, two or three divisions. First, they protect their coastline. Second, they used to intrude the boundaries of other waters. And second, they have different regiment of coast guards. Sir, um, their vision is to also defense and attack also, and our vision is only to protect us. Sir, is there difference in our visions and their visions?
That's a very complex question you asked. See, the U.S. Navy operates in a whole different, sort of philosophy. Yes, you're right. India has very clearly said that we are not into any hegemonic tendencies. We don't want to grab anybody else's land. The purpose of our armed forces is defending the nation's territorial integrity, and that is what we stand by. If for that we have to go and take some initiative or be offensive or aggressive, so be it. But the fundamental Indian philosophy is that we will defend our own territorial integrity and we will not go around. We will not be offensive in nature. That is understood. America, on the other hand, is a global superpower. It has to project power. It has to exercise its presence everywhere, and that is why its armed forces are as big as they are. They've got 11 super aircraft carriers. They've got 240 ships. They've got huge nuclear powered destroyers. They are able to deploy wherever in the world they want to. So, firstly, such a comparison cannot really be made between our two navies or our approaches to warfare. Coming to your forces thing, we have an equally good Coast Guard. You mentioned the U.S. Coast Guard. The Indian Coast Guard has been modeled quite a lot on the U.S. Coast Guard's model, and we have a very, very powerful and a very effective Coast Guard. I didn't mention anything about the Coast Guard during the course of this, but please don't underestimate it. It has done very effective work. It has got more than 150 ships. It has, I think, no, sorry, it has over 100 ships. It has more than 150 aircraft, and it's got a huge expansion plan. And it exercises with lots of foreign coast guards in the region for overall coastal security. So I think they're doing a great job themselves. They're now we are two different services. The Coast Guard is different, the Navy is different, which is a good thing in a way. But we work very closely together. And in war, the Coast Guard becomes a part of the Navy or works under the Navy. So that is the sort of structure. But I don't think we can really draw a comparison between the U.S. Navy operating philosophy or their maritime strategy or their
Sir, they
maritime.
have a big budget than us. They have a big budget than us.
Yeah, they have a huge budget. The American budget is huge, but they have to because they have to maintain that force.
Prathamesh, I'll just add on one simple thing since you talked about the budget. See, everything stems down your population, okay? It's the ultimate underlying factor. Even your HDI, your GDI, the budget and everything. You have to understand that our population is also huge. That is number one. Number two is do not underestimate your naval power and everything. Even in Gurgaon, we have something called the IFC-IOR, that is the Information Fusion Center of the Indian Ocean region, where navies from everywhere is coming and they are looking at us to come and work with us. So don't worry about that they might have different commands like the INTCOM, and then they might have the CENTCOM and INDOPACOM and everything. So don't worry that in the sense that, okay, they have a different kind of an outlook and we do not. We are not in that expansionist model. We do not want to go and we do not want to grab anybody else's land. That is a typical behavior. If not, that is a typical behavior of the American foreign policy and also the Chinese foreign policy. You see everywhere, whatever the wars that is being brewing on, there is some kind of foreign involvement that is coming from the West or that is coming from China. So that is not the case which is happening for us. So I'll just want to draw a line over there. Probably that will give you an underlying statement. What we are a professional force. Our air force, our army, our navy are all professional force. And even if I look at the history, the Westerners, they were looking at us from our troop contribution. Had our troop contribution not been there in the World War One or World War Two, they wouldn't have won the battles. That's the truth. That is actually the truth. So that's all from my end.
Ma'am, I
Uh,
completely agree with you, ma'am. Sure, sir. Ma'am, I completely agree. Thank you, Sam.
So I have a quick question.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Hello.
Yeah. So
Hello.
it's a little short question. How your career in Navy has, shaped your understanding of diplomacy and international relations and international conflicts?
Well, everything I've learned about diplomacy and international relations, international conflict, has been because I was in the Navy. Had I been in some civilian profession, I probably would have known nothing about it. So, yes, it has shaped us as people, it has shaped our personality. I joined the NDA when I was 17 years old. So, you can never take the Navy out of me in any manner, even though I've retired. But I think but more seriously, I think it's the exposure we get. We go, right from the time we are young officers, we are posted on ships. Ships go for goodwill cruises. Ships go for overseas deployments. We go and interact with foreign navies. We understand their way of operating. We are when we go to a country, we are sensitized that look, you're going to this country. This is what the sort of country you're visiting. Be careful about their local customs. Do not offend them in any way. Things like that. So I think all that slowly shapes you in many ways. Then we operate in cities like Mumbai, we operate in cities like Vizag, where we are exposed to, foreign navies coming and operating there, interacting with people even in the civilian domain. So I think all those things, even though it's not consciously sort of trained into us, it sort of becomes part of our system. So we have an inherent understanding. I mean, if I'm not a formal diplomat, so I cannot sort of give you a theory of international relations, but
Yes.
many of the things I will do which subconsciously come to me because of my sort of training and because of my exposure, would probably reflect on many of those theories without my knowing that they're reflecting on those theories because I'm not a formal student of international relations or a formal student of diplomacy. But I think every naval officer you come across, every naval person does have a fundamental understanding of these things by sheer exposure and experience that he gains while in the Navy. Does that answer your
Yeah,
question, Sadia?
yeah, that's
Okay.
absolutely, absolutely.
Hello. I have a question for Anamitra, ma'am.
Yes, yes, please go ahead.
As you mentioned, Chinese foreign policy, ma'am. How do you see the role of China and US in the Chinese Sea and the Indian Ocean? Like viewing Chinese role with Philippines and current with Taiwan and as a bullying big brother in the Indian Ocean.
So you want me to answer the Chinese perspective, like bullying this thing,
Ma'am,
how
how do
China
you see the near future, like the role of China and the US, the
with the
role of
role of
US?
China and US, and you want me to predict how the Indian perspective will get involved or something along
Yeah,
those
yeah,
lines.
yeah.
Okay, see, the first thing first is I'll make it very clear, okay? This bullying thing will continue. None of them will get into a full war conflict. That is for sure. And I think even Commodore sir will also agree here that they will never get into a full conflict, be it the Taiwan, be it anywhere. China will never want to get into conflicts. The reason is number one is China is a businessman. For them, their trade is very much important. And now that Trump has also come into power, he is also trying to, he will, I'm not saying he's trying to, but he will also in the near future, he will also try to stop the wars that are brewing in different places. They want to advance their trade. Once a war or any conflict breaks out, the first thing that gets affected is your trade, your supplies. And there is also another thing I think I had missed out, that is the protection of the subsea cables. Please understand that we are in a digital world. If anything happens, right, the first attack that can happen is through your digital media. We are so and so increasingly dependent. If somebody comes and they just destroys your subsea cables, the entire information goes into fall into dark pit. There is going to be no access into information, and if there's no access into information, it will.
We've lost you.
Yeah.
Anamitra, we lost your audio.
Ma'am, sir, she left.
No, couldn't have left. It must have got disconnected. She won't leave halfway through an answer. I'm sure it must have got disconnected. But what she was explaining is, I'll just continue until she comes back again. I think what she was explaining is that as far as China goes, I would agree with her that China has got a very ambitious global program. You know the deadlines. 2035, they want to be the most advanced military in the world, and by 2049, they want to be the single biggest global superpower. They want to supersede the US as a global superpower, and they're doing everything towards that. Whether it's BRICS, whether it's looking for an alternate currency, whether it is expansionism, whether it's the Belt and Road Initiative. You take any of their big time programs, they're all aimed at making China a superpower by 2049. If they get embroiled in a conflict, in a war with either India or the US or anybody else, uh, this ambition will get severely dented because the economy will go back by 5 to 10 years straight away. Oh, sorry, Anamitra is back. She can continue.
No, no, sir. Please continue. Please continue. I'll add on, sir, if anything happens.
So I fully agree with her that they will not get into a full scale conflict with anybody right now. Yes, Taiwan is a red line. Taiwan is something that, Xi Jinping, my only worry is Xi Jinping because he's not getting younger. And, it is his legacy that he wants to leave behind as the greatest Chinese leader, even probably greater than Mao Zedong, which may drive him to take some rash action, particularly when it comes to Taiwan and the South China Sea. Because if he finds Taiwan not playing out the way he wants to, see, China doesn't want to attack Taiwan because for them, Taiwan is not a separate country. It's part of China. They're saying we're just getting our own people back into our fold. We are not fighting a war with anyone. But if push comes to shove, he may be forced into a conflict. Now, the one thing that has become very clear after the Russia-Ukraine war is there's going to be no short, sharp conflict. It's not that Taiwan is small, China is big, so in 3 days or 4 days they'll take on Taiwan. Ukraine was nothing. The war is in its third year. China can't afford that. So I don't think a full-scale conflict will happen. This kind of little, brinkmanship will continue for some more time. Gray zone tactics will continue. America is also aware of it. America also doesn't have the capacity to go and fight a full-scale war with China, a naval battle. India would not like to get embroiled in a conflict. We've got our own economic compulsions. We want to be a big part as well. So if you take all that into account, this brinkmanship will continue for some more time, but it will not escalate into a full-scale war. That's my view, at least for the next 1 decade or so, at least. I don't think it will happen. But I know, Anamitra, please go ahead. Sorry, you got
Yes, I
disconnected.
mean, I absolutely agree with you regarding this, that it's not going to be a full scale conflict, maybe some gray zone warfare, some kind of, small hustle and tussle, maybe some kind of diplomatic fringes, nothing more than that. But as like from the Indian point of view, what this is again, my reading says that we will not get involved in any sides, neither US, we have our own
Correct.
independent standing. We are very
Correct.
clear that we follow in the policy of non-alignment. Nothing. Maybe if somebody comes and asks, we might act as a mediator in that case, but we will not get involved in somebody else's war. That is clear from the Indian stand. And we have already seen this happening in the Russia-Ukraine back there, also in Israel and the Hamas conflict that is already ongoing. So it's simple as that. There is nothing is going to maximum. What can happen is that it can have some effect in our trade. But then again, I don't think it's going to affect so much so because we might look for some alternate possible options as well if the trade which is coming in or flowing in from China or Japan, if that is going to be an option. But I think there are going to be certain other I mean, that is again for the the international forum to come across and look at other options, maybe some problem in the economic front, but definitely wherein the military confrontation or wherein the diplomatic confrontation is concerned, we are not going to get involved. That is clear, and that
Absolutely.
is that
I
is
agree.
evident. That has been evident ever since ages. We are very, very clear in this front.
Yeah, I agree with that. Totally. Anand, does you answer your question or is there anything else you wanted to know on this?
Thank you, sir. I
Okay.
got my answer.
All right.
Thank you, ma'am.
No issues.
So I really want to thank Commodore Anil Singh and of course Anamitra ma'am. And we would look forward to just engage with you on these subjects in the near future. And with this, happy Navy Day on the behalf of the Indian Netizens teams. And we'll just a word of thanks on this enlightening words and the kind of the conceptions that you pointed out. And thank you so much, sir.
Thank
And
you. It
thank
was a
you
pleasure being
so
with you all this afternoon. And I look forward to our further interaction as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Nandini. Thank you to the entire team, and thank you to Sir and other participants who are here. Thank you so much. It was really nice being here, and happy Navy Day to you as well. I definitely look forward to further engagements with the team as well, and it's a lovely team that I just interacted with one of your co-founders, and he just said that you guys have started this venture 3 months back, and the metrics is actually showing that you guys have worked really hard and really
Yeah.
well to come this far. So my commendations to you guys. Keep up the good work, and of course, like learning and studying never ends. It's a ongoing procedure. Keep on learning, and the more you learn, again look for something new, and it's a lifelong procedure. That's all from my end. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, Anamitra. Look forward to catching up sometime. Bye.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nandini. That was very
Welcome,
nicely
Mona.
done.
Thank you so much, sir.
Can we disconnect?
Sir, I don't know.
Yeah, hello.
No, can we? Can we
Yeah,
leave?
yeah.
Or do you want to
Yes,
continue?
Thank you so much, sir and ma'am,
Okay.
for joining.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thanks
Thank
a
you.
lot.
Thanks.
या प्रथमेश भाई कितना क्वेश्चन पूछते हैं
Mic off.